Oklahoma Gardening is a production of the Oklahoma Cooperative Extension Service as part of the land grant mission of the Division of Agricultural Sciences and Natural Resources at Oklahoma State University, dedicated to improving the quality of life of the citizens of Oklahoma through research-based information. Underwriting assistance for our program is provided by the Oklahoma Department of Agriculture, Food, and Forestry, helping to keep Oklahoma green and growing. Today on Oklahoma Gardening, host Casey Hentges plants some asparagus crowns. At Tinker Air Force Base, we see how prescribed fire is used for land management in an urban area. OSU Payne County Extension horticulturist Keith Reed shows how to use a frost blanket to shade cool season crops. And Barbara Brown shows how to make a nutritious casserole with what you have on hand.
Asparagus is one of our favorite vegetables and often a sign that spring is here as those fresh shoots start coming up out of the ground. Now, if you're familiar with asparagus in the grocery store and you haven't tried asparagus straight out of the garden, I would encourage you to plant it. Now is a great time to start planting your asparagus, but be aware that you're not going to be able to harvest a good crop of asparagus for a few years. So kind of like when you start a new landscape, you want to plant the trees first. When you start a new vegetable garden, you want to plant your asparagus first. It is a perennial and it needs some time to get established in order to harvest from it. Now, a lot of times when you buy asparagus, what you're going to be buying is something called a crown. And you can see here we've got a few that we've been soaking in water. When you get them, you want to soak them in water for about 20 minutes just to kind of revive those roots and get them moist before they go into the soil. You can see this is a crown and it's got a lot of spidery-like roots coming off of it. And at the base here, you can see this has got some new shoots coming. Now we're going to plant these into the ground and we're going to dig a hole that's about 6 to 8 inches deep. When you do this, you can, if you're in a garden that's got some good soil, you can just kind of dig a trench if you want. We're going to plant about 3 crowns along this end of the vegetable bed. Now when you're planting, you want to make sure to plant your asparagus a little bit out of the way because, as I said, these are perennial, and so while you harvest the shoots early in the springtime, you're going to allow those ferns to continue to grow throughout the summertime, so you don't want them to interfere with the rest of your vegetable garden. I've got my holes dug here and they're about 18 inches apart between in the row, and in between 2 rows you're going to want about 3 to 4 feet. Now when we plant these, we're going to plant them about 6 to 8 inches deep. I kind of like to spread out the roots a little bit to get them established and have those roots really going out so that they're ready to get out and get those nutrients. And we're just going to then backfill and cover up that plant. Don't worry too much if it's already sprouting. That sprout will find its way up. Now you can see I'm not completely backfilling it. I'm only going to backfill it with about 3 inches of soil for now. As I see those shoots start to come up more, I'll put another 3 inches of soil on top of that. And that just allows for it to grow as I'm filling it in, almost sort of like what you would do with potatoes. Now this variety is called Mary Washington, and you'll often find Mary and Martha Washington as pretty common varieties that you'll find. Now asparagus are dioecious, and dioecious means that there are female and male plants. Now, a lot of people will say that the males are better producers and they produce a thicker stalk. And the other thing about males is that you tend to not have the berries because female plants produce the berries. So you might take a look at yours when you start seeing them come up. If they've got those red berries, then you know you have a female cultivar. There are several cultivars that have been bred just to be male plants. A lot of those have the name Jersey in them, Jersey Night and things like that. And that's because Rutgers has done a lot of development with those. So if you're looking for a male plant, you might look at one that's got the name Jersey in it. So at this point, we've got ours planted. Now the thing is as I said, this is a perennial vegetable. It's a long-term plant. You're going to get about 15 to 20 years of production out of this, but it's going to take some time. So on the second year, because these are 1-year-old plants that we're planting today. So next year we'll be able to harvest maybe 2 or 3 sprouts per plant, but you don't want to harvest all the sprouts that are coming up because it's still really trying to establish itself as a plant. So be modest when you're harvesting them, and you'll harvest those as soon as they come up. After you start to see that sprout sort of unfurl a little bit and you start to see some of that foliage, you don't want to harvest it anymore at that point. The third year, you can harvest as many of those sprouts as you want. Again, after those leaves start to unfurl, you don't want to harvest those sprouts anymore. Let it go to fern. And that's where that plant is going to photosynthesize, really develop those carbohydrates that makes this root system stronger for another 15 years. For more information, check out this fact sheet. Today we're in a very urban environment talking about horticulture and prescribed burning at a location that a lot of people probably wouldn't think about. Joining us today is John Krupovage, who is the Natural Resource Manager here at Tinker Air Force Base. And a lot of times when we talk about Tinker, we think airplanes, not natural resources. But John, tell us a little bit about your role and what's going on today.
Well, you know, we're a federal agency, and we have land to manage, and we've got to be good stewards of that land, and prescribed fire is one of the ways that we do that.
And today is late February, so we're talking about burning here because this is the time where there's a lot of fuel. Explain kind of the challenges about burning on a base here.
Well, on this particular base, we've got over 700 buildings. We've got 2 main runways. We've got I-40 on one side, I-240 on the other. 30,000 people, you've got a lot of activity going on. So we have to be very aggressive and really relentless with our communications to make sure we've got everybody engaged and everybody involved both on base and off base to make sure they understand, hey, we're burning. This smoke is coming up because we're doing a prescribed burn out here, not something else.
Yeah, so you want to make sure everybody's aware of what's going on. And tell us a little bit about the team that's here helping you.
This team is from the Air Force Wildland Fire Center. They're out of San Antonio. And we've got folks that come in, and these guys are wildland fire experts. That's what they do. And so they come on the base and they basically execute the burn for us. It's basically a team effort. We as biologists on the base set up the prescription and what we want to do to make sure we meet certain objectives, whether it's for fuel reductions, to remove cedars, or whether it's to improve wildlife habitat, whether it's to improve aesthetics, whether it's something to do with the airfield environment, whatever that is, we set those objectives up and then these guys come in and execute.
So John, we're currently burning in kind of a rough area of a golf course here on base, but you've got a lot of land that's in private, public, in housing areas. Tell us a little bit of what you're burning.
Right, so here on the golf course we've got out of play areas. So these were areas that it costs us to maintain these areas. So instead of mowing these routinely, these out of play areas were converted to prairie, or in the process of being converted to a prairie. And fire is going to be the way that we maintain that. Other areas on base, like over in our housing area, we had houses that were demolished. New houses were built in privatized housing. When those houses were demolished, we had this land. What are we going to do with it? It was floodplain area. We've got federal executive orders that require us to manage that in certain ways. And so that's what we did. And what we did was to convert it to prairie. And so it's a floodplain area. It functions by converting it to prairie. It allows us to filter water, gives us better water quality. It gives us the flood storage we need on base to make sure that we don't impact the mission when we have large, heavy rain events. And so that's what we've decided to do with that particular piece of land. It's prairie, and we're maintaining it with fire.
So John, overall, the whole base, how many acres do you have that will be burned?
Well, currently this year we're burning 215. Last year we burned 130. So it's ramped up a little bit this year. We may have a total of about 500 that we would burn over the course of the next 5 years. We won't always burn that many every year. We'll eventually get into a rotation where we'll burn maybe a third of it in a year, and then the next year we'll burn another third, and the next year another third, so we'll be on a 3-year rotation. So these prairie areas and these natural areas are scattered across the base. We've got them at different locations. And for us, urban burning is just really, really critical. You know, the fuel load management is really important to make sure that we're not going to do anything that's going to impact the mission in a negative way, especially if we got cedars down around the runways or that kind of an area. So this helps us to maintain those areas and keep them in a state where we don't have those hazards.
Yeah, and obviously being on Air Force Base, I mean, there's definite priorities about airplane safety and smoke, I would imagine, and that sort of stuff. Can you speak to a little bit about the precautions that are being taken today?
Right, so for example, when we burn on the south end of the airfield, we burn with a north wind, so it carries smoke away from the airfield.
Okay.
When we burn on the north end of the airfield, we're burning with a south wind carrying the smoke north. So we're trying to keep smoke from getting onto the airfield itself, but we have to deal with the same kind of thing across the base. We've got housing areas. We don't want smoke going into the housing area. We've got our neighbors off base. We don't want smoke going there. So we burn in certain ways to get the smoke to lift and get out of here. We've got to make sure it's under a certain prescription so that we can achieve those goals.
And how's the wind today doing for us?
The wind today has been a real challenge. It was forecasted to be an east wind, southeast wind. We had it buck up to a west wind at one point, and that can be a real problem. And so we've got to be cautious with how we do things. And the wind speeds today were lower than normal. It was at the low end of our prescription, so it was down around 5 miles an hour, 6 miles an hour. When you get there, sometimes the winds can get variable, so the fire may not go the direction you want it to go. So that prescription is critical.
Right.
If it's outside the prescription, we don't burn.
All right, and this has been an ongoing process. This isn't the only day, and you'll continue on. How long is the interval for burning?
Right, we burn from January 1 till the end of March. That's our window, and that's because we have certain objectives, certain things we're trying to accomplish. And we've burned, this is our 5th day that we've burned out here, and we are about 75% complete.
All right, well, John, thank you so much. And I think a lot of times we don't think about Tinker and the natural resources, but we're glad that you're on top of this. And this is just the beginning of several segments that we're going to come down and talk with you about. We're going to talk about the actual establishment of these prairies and also a few little horny toad critters that you've got around here.
Looking forward to it.
Excellent. Thank you so much, John.
Thank you, Casey.
Today we're prepping our vegetable garden for our warm season vegetables that will soon be going in the ground. And one thing that you can do in preparation before you start planting those tomatoes is go ahead and build a tomato cage. Now often you'll see those little 3-foot metal cages that we pretty much know that your tomatoes will quickly grow out of those. So go ahead and build something that's going to be sturdy and really hold up to those sizable plants, especially if they're indeterminate tomatoes and some of the larger varieties. What we've done today is we've built a bamboo cage. You can easily find 6 to 8 foot bamboo poles that allow you to really go into the ground to give you plenty of strength. You can see we've got a good amount of wind blowing out here today, and even I built this to last. So I'm not a Boy Scout, I don't know how to tie all those special knots, but a simple slip knot around one end of the bamboo will give you plenty of rope then to tie around and make this cage. So the first thing I took into account was the spacing of my bed here. And so I really wanted to be able to plant the tomatoes on one side of this bed. This bed is about 5 feet wide. So we're going to spend about 2.5 feet for this tomato cage. So you can see here we've used one length of that pole to go along the distance of that bed. So go ahead and lay out one pole so you know exactly where to put your corner pieces. Also, when you're cutting your end pieces, a skill saw works really nice to give you a good smooth cut. But if you don't have a skill saw or a circular saw, you can also just use a hand saw to make that cut. Bamboo cuts pretty easily without too much effort there. A small heavy mallet will really work well to drive these bamboo stakes into the ground. Now if you do find that you're hitting some harder soil, you might use a piece of rebarb or something to kind of pre-drill that hole a little bit. But this bamboo really holds up well to being hammered on. It's pretty sturdy. You can see it's flexible in the wind that we have out here, but it's going to hold our tomatoes really well. Now what we used was just a simple twine, and what I found is the distance of about a yard, which if you go from the stretched out arm to your nose, you can see that that's about a yard. Works really well to wrap around your bamboo. And if you also, if you are working near a node, you want to make sure to kind of go on the upper side of that node so that it helps stabilize that knot so it doesn't slip down the bamboo, because there's a bit of a swollen area on that. I kind of like to leave a little tail on that slip knot because those come in handy to tie it and fasten it even more later on. Now if you don't want to use some sort of twine, which I like because it looks natural, you can also use, I mean there's a synthetic twine, and then there's always the good old zip ties that work really well also. A lot of times you can see people have made their own tomato cages out of some hog wire or something like that, and you can see these work pretty well. A lot of times you'll still need to put a T-post in the ground to stabilize them, and you can see again, while they have some more height to them than those ones you might purchase, our bamboo are still significantly taller, giving you a little bit more volume and support for your tomatoes as they grow. The other thing that's really nice about the bamboo versus one of these cages is once you've built these, you've got these to store, and they're kind of awkward, they're bulky, and you're going to need to take up a lot of room during your winter months to store these. This bamboo, you can use it from season to season. All you're going to do is need to untie this, cut the string or the zip tie, whichever you prefer, cut that, and take these bamboo sticks apart, and then you'll just have a smaller pile of sticks to store through the winter months. So we're going to be planting some tomatoes in here pretty soon, and depending on which variety of tomato you want to use, we're looking at this spacing and probably going to be able to plant 3 or 4 tomato plants. And as they continue to grow up, we're going to use this simple stretchy tape to sort of tie them in here and give them some support. Now the important reason why we want to trellis our tomatoes is it allows that vegetation to be up off the ground, which will help with better airflow and prevent diseases from getting in there and funguses from getting in there, and also more importantly allow us to harvest the bounty better. Now what we've got built here is just 4 corners with 3 levels to it. I think this is really going to work for us, but if we find later on that we need to add a little bit more support, there's no reason that we can't come back in and add another midpoint in here to give it a little more structural integrity. You can also add some more end pieces if you want to do that as well. It's really up to you and what you're wanting to grow and your particular environment that you're trying to grow in.
Today we're here in the gardens of Our Daily Bread Food and Resource Center in Stillwater in the community garden, and we're just getting started with our spring planting. So here we are, the last weekend of March. We've just planted some cool season transplants such as cabbage and broccoli sprouts a couple of days ago, and now here we are 90 degrees. So I wanted to use this as an opportunity to talk about a product that many of you are familiar with that we use in the garden that has a secondary advantage. So this white material right here, I call it frost blanket, but it's actually a manufactured material that's used to provide cold weather protection to help us get an early start in the garden or to protect crops from early fall freezes. It's said that this material can give between 5 and 8 degrees of additional protection from the cold. And so we've already used that for our cold days back up several weeks ago. But now with this crazy little 2-day weather pattern, what we've done is we've just installed this for a temporary shade. Right now, it happens to be that it's cloudy, but just as we were about to start this segment, the sun was shining bright. And so we were worried about these tender little seedlings actually burning up. So we've got this on, we installed it yesterday. We're going to run it today. There's actually a threat of hail tonight, so we're going to leave it on tonight. And then we return to a normal temperature pattern tomorrow. We'll pop this off, we'll just drop it on the ground here, and we'll keep it handy, and there we go.
Whenever you're trapped in your home and you can't get out to the supermarket or the store to get fresh supplies, it's always good to have a pantry that you've got an emergency food supply. So today we're going to show you an idea of how you can use some of that. So this is basically a pantry chicken stew. You could use other types of meat if you chose. What I have is a can of mixed vegetables. I've drained some of the liquid out simply because I want to have control of how thick it's going to be. So this is the liquid that I drained out. If you're watching sodium content in your diet, because just because you can't get out to the market doesn't mean you still, those health concerns you had before disappear. So if you put a no salt added vegetable mix, or this could be canned peas and carrots, it could be frozen peas and carrots, or frozen mixed vegetables, or frozen whatever, or canned whichever. Just drain off the liquid that comes on them if you need to watch the sodium content, and don't reuse that again later. So I'm going to add these to my pan. I didn't drain it all out. I want a little bit of that liquid there. And then to that, I'm going to add a can of mushroom soup, cream of mushroom soup. You could use cream of chicken, cream of celery, whichever one you have in your pantry and that you like the flavor of. So you could get a reduced sodium version of that if you needed to. I've also got a half a cup of milk. If you don't have fresh milk or you want to save that for drinking, you could use a fourth of a cup of evaporated milk and then top that up with water. You could use powdered milk, whichever kind you can get your hands on. I'm also going to add a little bit of seasoning to this. Now, if it was summertime when you were trapped in your home and you couldn't get out to the store, you could use fresh herbs if you've got them growing. If not, I'm going to add a fourth of a teaspoon of dried thyme, about an eighth of a teaspoon of garlic powder, and an eighth of a teaspoon of black pepper. Now again, you can see the amount of thickness. If this is too thin for the stew that you want or the way that you like stew to be, this could be a soup. It could easily become that by watering it down with the rest of the liquid. But I'm going to add a little bit more liquid to it, so it's going to get it even a little bit thinner. I've got a can of chicken. Now, if you've got your own chickens, or if you've got chicken in the freezer, just get out a cup and a half or 2 cups of chicken, either fresh or leftover cooked. It could be turkey, could be beef, could be pork, whatever you have in order to get by in a case like this is going to work for you. This one just happened to be chicken. Tuna probably wouldn't work as well, but salmon might. You could make it into a seafood stew. This is going to come up to a simmer and simmer for about 15 minutes to let the flavors blend. If you're in a situation where electricity or gas are limited, you could cook this outside on a grill if you needed to, or you could do it on a camping stove. If you're worried about the amount of gas you're using, you wouldn't have to let it cook that full 15 minutes. You could bring it up till it's a full heat, bring it up to a simmer, let it go for a couple of minutes, and call it a day. When you think it's done, I would suggest that you stir it from time to time because it is a dairy here, and dairy is apt to scorch on the bottom. So keep the temperature low, check it from time to time and stir it. Then go ahead, and when you find that the taste is where it needs to be or the thickness is where it needs to be, then you're ready to serve. Again, I'm going to serve it over a baked potato. You have a lot of options as to how you actually go about putting it on that plate. This should serve somewhere between 4 to 6, depending on how hungry the people are. And then the last thing that you can do, if it's an option that you can get to fresh parsley, that's great. Dried parsley can also make it look a little bit better. You could also sprinkle with a little bit of paprika, or even a little bit more a grind of black pepper, or if you've got some Parmesan cheese or shredded cheese, put a little bit of that on it. It's going to make it, give it a little bit more added appeal to the eye as well as to the taste. I hope you'll give this one a try. It's Pantry Chicken Stew. I'm Barbara Brown.
For many people in the horticulture industry, a big portion of their business relies on these spring sales. I just want to remind you, spring isn't canceled, and many greenhouses and nurseries are full of beautiful plants that are looking for a good home. If you are a gardener and wanting to get plants, I would encourage you to reach out to your local nursery and greenhouse to find out how you can still get those plants. Many of them are getting creative about how to get you those plants in safe ways.
Next week, Casey will plant tomatoes and peppers. We'll build a crisscross trellis for climbers. Keith Reed will talk about ongoing mechanical Bermuda grass control in a vegetable garden. And Barbara Brown will have a tasty recipe. We wish you health and wellness, and we'll see you next week for more Oklahoma Gardening. To find out more information about show topics, as well as recipes, videos, articles, fact sheets, and other resources, including a directory of local extension offices, be sure and visit our website, oklahomagardening.okstate.edu. And we always have great information, answers to questions, photos, and gardening discussions on your favorite social media as well. Join in on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can find this entire show and other recent shows, as well as individual segments on our Oklahoma Gardening YouTube channel. And tune in to our OK Gardening Classics YouTube channel to watch segments from previous hosts. Oklahoma Gardening is produced by the Oklahoma Cooperative Extension Service as part of the Division of Agricultural Sciences and Natural Resources at Oklahoma State University. The Botanic Garden at OSU is home to our studio gardens, and we encourage you to come visit this beautiful Stillwater jewel. We would like to thank our generous underwriter, the Oklahoma Department of Agriculture, Food, and Forestry. Additional support is also provided by Pond Pro Shop, Greenleaf Nursery and the Garden Debut Plants, the Oklahoma Horticultural Society, and the Tulsa Garden Club.